So, morning everyone. As Laura's told you, I'm Jo West, and this morning's session is about story sharing in community development. So, you've probably seen from the blurb that I live in Manchester with my family, and I'm studying to be a church-related community work minister with the United Reformed Church. Now, this is a form of ministry in the URC which uses community development to support local churches as they seek to work more intentionally with their community, moving away from community service models. But don't worry, you're going to hear loads more about me as we go through this presentation. But I wanted to start with what we're not going to be talking about. Jumping straight in with number one, this isn't a story about whether story is important or whether we should be using it in community development contexts. I'm just going to gently assume that we all agree with Sharon Blackie when she argues we are narrative creatures, hardwired for story. We make sense of the world from childhood onwards through the stories we find or the stories that find us. They're the stars that we navigate by. So story is vital. Stories of all shapes and sizes and colours and tones, never mind preferences. My favourite story is Where the Wild Things Are. Dressing up as Max was the best World Book Day costume that I ever made for myself. But there are people I love dearly who hold very different opinions about the book. It's just not everyone's cup of tea. Now, this leads us neatly into number two. I won't just be talking about books. Books are brilliant, but story is about more than books. Story is about our deep need to share with others, how that helps us to feel seen, and the value there is in listening to others in return. Story is vital, but I don't need to convince you, I'm sure. Finally, number three, this is not a foolproof how-to guide for using story in community development context. I mean, if in doubt, AI after all. Foolproof how-to guides and community development aren't really the easiest of bedfellows. It's such a beautifully unique and local and individual process that's interdisciplinary and responsive and reflective. I can't decide what will work beautifully in your contexts. I can only tell you what worked in mine. So, like all good stories, this one will aim to be full of questions, not answers. And this does leave you to do the hard work yourselves, and I know that that's really annoying, but the flip side is that when it goes beautifully, it's got nothing to do with me, and you can take all the credit for yourself. So, let's get started. Can feminists tell the truth? The authors of Feminist Methodology ask this question as the title of their third chapter. Ramazanoglu and Hollander perhaps being deliberately provocative, confrontational even. Maybe they're using shock tactics to make us take a closer look. I'm referencing the chapter in this talk. You know that it worked for me. Once they have your attention, the chapter explores criticisms that have been levelled at feminist research methods. Is it possible for feminism to be entirely objective when much research is starting from such an openly subjective perspective? Should subjective motivations for initiating research be considered unhelpful biases? Then they turn the tables on positivism, asking whether the rocky ground of social research with real-life human beings can ever uncover cold, hard truth. Whether cold, hard truth is actually what we want at all. Instead of starting to ask whether any single school of methodological research can tell the truth, we as readers begin to wonder whether any of us can tell the truth. And please don't panic. I'm not going to digress into a 10-minute rant about the meaning of truth, even though I really do love a very good tangent. I promise this does bear some relevance to story and the ways we use it in community development contexts. I think it challenges us to be honest about how and why we choose to use story. What do we want from story? Do we have pre-existing motivations? And where better to start than ourselves as storytellers? So, who am I? I'm Jo. I'm a middle-aged woman. Having accepted this as fact, I can recognise some positives. I'm now much more willing and able to see things from different points of view. I've embraced life's literal and metaphorical grey. I've got much better boundaries. I still care about what people think, but honestly, not as much. I'm a mother of 4 children, one of whom has complex additional needs. But honestly, I'm really thankful that now they're teenagers and beyond. This means that my chosen specialist subjects are mastermind, or if I'm honest with myself, the local pub quiz. They're no longer likely to be Octonauts or Pokemon. Julia Donaldson picture books, they might still get a look in. As a result of caring responsibilities, much of my community development practice has been as a volunteer. And that can make me reluctant to value my own voice and my contribution. As a runner, I'm aware that you really don't need to be good at things to enjoy them. As a former drama student, stories I tell have a tendency to be slightly more flamboyant than is strictly necessary. And as a former early years practitioner, stories have a tendency to be slightly more flamboyant than is strictly necessary. I'm a theology student, and so I'm encouraged to notice in my everyday life the ways God is at work in our world. But this doesn't mean that every time I tell going on bear hunt to under 5s, I'm going to add on a 5-minute sermon about the question of suffering, even if it does make me wonder. So none of these separate things that I've told you about myself paints the whole picture of me. I'm not a series of neat boxes. The many parts of me have a habit of merging. But even choosing to tell you these things about myself, there are things that made me wonder. There were things I told you that weren't very important to the story of what makes me me. Why did I include them? There were things that I was really self-conscious about, unsure what your response might be. There are things about myself that feel about as obvious as if I'd got them written on my forehead in biro. In her book Belonging, Hooks describes how important place is to her sense of self as a writer. Then how surprised she was that those reading her work didn't see it as clearly as she did. Being more aware of who we are as storytellers helps us to reflect better on how we respond to the stories that others tell. We should be asking, what of myself am I weaving into this story? Am I at risk of being too flamboyant or irritable or nonchalant? Are my niche references to the Mariana Trench or cone snails particularly helpful? Occasionally we can be overcautious and anxiously aware, and at others we just assume. These parts of us will influence the stories we tell, whether it is a story about the day the bins go out or a story about holistic care for vulnerable families. Story is not an exchange of incontestable fact and should not strive to only tell the truth. Can story help us make sense of emotions we experience, not just things as they happen? Can story help us articulate ourselves and our community in response to trauma or adversity? In these instances, does truth matter at all? So what do we want to hear? If the truth can be bumped down the list of priorities, what do we want to hear and from whom? I have a friend, and I've not seen her for years, but when our children were very small, we would try our best to meet up as often as we could for a catch-up. Invariably, there'd be cake involved or an ongoing craft project. And she once started one of these social gatherings with, "Start at the beginning, don't miss anything out." It was a really fun and cheery way to start a conversation, but it has stuck with me for years. I felt seen, I felt valued, I didn't feel rushed. There wasn't an agenda. Now, this isn't always possible, even with the people closest to us, never mind in community development contexts. But what difference does it make when it is? Does story sharing always come with a strict tick sheet, a numbered turn in a queue, pre-existing outcomes from funders that need to be proved? Now, don't get me wrong, money is important, but do we let our listening be led by it? Nick Andrews speaks beautifully about this in his interview on the Community Development podcast. Community development work can too easily become cornered into proving preset requirements rather than spending time on relationships that are responsive. There should be space for people to surprise us, space for people to answer questions that haven't even been asked, space for people to decide for themselves what is important about the journey the project has taken them on. In the 2023 film American Fiction, the main character is an author who becomes increasingly frustrated with the way that audiences only seem to be interested in stereotypical representations of Black experience, assuming that all that needs to be said can be summed up in a neat tale of poverty and violence. He wants to tell stories that reflect his own experience, but no one wants to hear them. He's not allowed to tell his own story, but he must create something that others recognise as truth. One of the really beautiful things about being a student is the opportunity it provides to observe. You get the chance to be involved or a visitor at such a broad range of projects, part of placements that might normally fall outside of your skill set or your experience. You can normally help with the washing up because there's always washing up, and you can chat, you can ask questions with genuine curiosity as you set out coffee cups or jigsaws or quiz sheets. You can join in the sing-along or watch and reflect. It's a privileged position. I'm fully aware of this. You can notice and reflect without any of the weight of expectation. That you can save for the assignments. I've observed spaces where external expectations dominate the conversation and relationships. We have provided this group or session or support for you. Now you must give me one sentence about how it has changed your life. I'm exaggerating, of course. I've already told you I do love a bit of drama. I've also observed places where people are held and appreciated for everything that's going on in their life, not just the specific area that the project has been designed to support. Places where people feel able to share all of their story. I mean, there will still be feedback collected. There's always feedback, like there's always washing up, but it isn't the be-all or the end-all. Questions are open. The shared journey is to be travelled together. But how do we create these positive spaces? Spaces where individuals we work alongside have the opportunity to pause and speak and reflect and be encouraged and find their voice, have their say, whether they align with our objectives or not, and know that they're valued. How do we create positive spaces where all voices in the room feel equally able to contribute? How do we create positive spaces that are actually accessible. I feel it's really important to name here out loud that to ensure practice is deeply and entirely anti-discriminatory, fully accessible to all, is hard. If it wasn't, everyone could do it. We can easily give it a passing nod and make a few tweaks and adjustments. But if we're really determined, it's a Herculean task, seemingly impossible. For every success at drawing someone into the conversation, there is someone else stood outside the circle drawn on the ground, feeling disappointed and forgotten and missed. But just because things aren't hard doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. One of the most exciting opportunities that I had in my previous placement was to consider the question of accessible activities to promote family literacy. Now, research from charities like the National Literacy Trust show that family engagement in developing communication skills and literacy skills has a huge impact on a child's success and ongoing achievement. But what if English is an additional language in your family? What if you don't have books to share? What if you don't even have the space for borrowed books because you could be moved with very little notice? What if you struggle with reading and you'd rather forget your school experience? I was able to experiment with different play opportunities which could allow families to engage with story and each other without written words, as part of one larger stay and play session, but also as a small group for parents, like a small series of focus sessions. The sessions weren't perfect, and some parents voted with their feet, but the sessions did work really hard to be as inclusive as possible. In the first session, one parent noticed someone else's child really liked a particular type of toy and mentioned that a story about that next week would be really nice. So having a tight plan about the whole series was never going to work out. Weaving people's preferences and suggestions into subsequent themes and activities became increasingly important. And it was a conscious way to make sure that people felt seen and involved. Building confidence, of course, takes longer than a few weeks, but I was allowed a little snapshot as I was working alongside other professionals who'd been listening for a lot longer. Story sharing in our context, in addition to the bread and butter of what we're working to achieve, can have a massive impact on the flourishing of the individuals that we work with and their communities. Martin Seligman, who's written extensively on positive psychology, emphasises the importance of meaningful interactions and relationships when considering human well-being. Story is vital, meeting our deep need to share with others how that helps us feel seen and recognising there is value in listening to others in return. In my current placement, the project I'm working most closely with is a brilliant example of a space where story sharing is just woven through the everyday business of the group. As a visiting participant of the community art group, I can sit and share with my neighbour how the fabric that I'm sewing, with its boring straight lines, is one day going to be transformed into the visual image that sits in my head. It's a story of hope. My neighbour might share with me how long they've been coming to the group, how it's changed their life. Their neighbour might ask how their week was. And the next person might ask about another group they attend and mention they'd like to invite other people to join it. Someone across notices that my neighbour is using a particularly lovely colour or suggests a medium that they've used before and really enjoyed. There's a gentle, pleasing hum of story sharing that washes over the group. It's ebbing and flowing through the session, and there is space to opt out, but not many people do. It's a story sharing good news story, and there isn't much that I can add to that. Perhaps I can think of creative ways to capture some feedback stories, but otherwise I'm sure there's going to be plenty of washing up that I can be getting on with. So, quick recap to conclude. These are the main questions that we've considered together. What kind of storytellers are we? How does this influence the way we listen to others? And is truth the most important consideration for story sharing? Who gets the chance to speak? Are there ways to make things more accessible and fairer? We have perhaps tried, we don't always get it right first time or second time or third time, but I think community development could quite easily be described as stubborn. And where have we noticed story sharing in action? I just think it's always nice to notice things that are going well, and have those as a bit of an antidote to the things that aren't. So, and on the final slide, I've just got the books that I mentioned directly in the presentation, but I'm sure we're going to be able to come up with loads more resources together as we chat and discuss. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jo. Thanks very much for that. I will make sure that everybody gets the bibliography and the presentation. This will also be made available as a whole thing, so you'll be able to see it there. But I'll make sure Jo's presentation and Jo's bibliography there and any other resources get shared with everybody. But yeah, thank you, Jo. That was really, really interesting. It's the point in the session where we open it up. Has anybody got any questions? Anything you'd like to just talk about? Open your microphones. Let's see if anybody's got anything to start us off.
Yeah, I was just thinking about your last comment, Jo, about like where we listen. I'm involved in trying to turn a set of allotments into a community allotment, and actually, it's the stories that's made the difference. People saying what they grow, where they've got, as this rhubarb come from their granddad. Do you know just all the little stories? And I was just thinking when you were talking, gee, that's what glues those people together and why it's moving from just a set of plots to a community. And we deliberately trying to do that. But yeah, it's about all the stories that happen around the bonfire or happen on the rows and people swapping and sharing. But it's about stories. And I hadn't thought of it like that before. It's fascinating. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That's a brilliant, it's a
Yeah,
lovely
yeah.
example.
It's made me realise that if I thought about it a bit more, what more you could do to encourage that, not only there but elsewhere. So it's something I think I just taken for granted that people natter, but not really thought about the way you could maybe help it to help people gel and feel part of stuff. Yeah, loads to think about there. Thank you. Really
And I
fascinating.
think sometimes as people, there's people who are maybe naturally really good at that, and there's other people who struggle a bit more. But if you can create that space where everyone feels that they can join in, that's just really precious, isn't it?
I think it's quite easier. It's easier when you're outdoors, I think, because people are there for a purpose. They want to grow some things on their plot. But because you're outdoors and you're wandering around and you go to borrow a wheelbarrow, you go to do whatever, there's always those spaces for tiny interactions with people. And I don't know how it would work so much indoors, although so some of your own techniques, but certainly on an outdoors thing. And I suppose it's like if you organise walks or park runs and that, all those little tiny interactions are the bits that get people back each time.
Yeah. But I think it's about having that other task as well, isn't it? It takes some of the awkwardness. We maybe have a little bit of awkwardness as human beings of interacting with people we don't know very well. But if you've got a task, if I'm sat doing my sewing, it's not awkward for me to sit and do backstitch in silence, but I can start a conversation or I can pause and speak to someone on the other side. So I think like the tasks you're describing as well in the allotment, it helps that because it gives you a space to speak or not speak and both being okay, isn't it?
Yes, and to join in if you want or not. Yeah. That's good.
Has anybody else got anything they want to that's come up from that for them, or they want to ask Jo as a question? Go on, Jim.
It's interesting in terms of the language we're using, Joe, and I've had a little involvement with what are called the Poverty Truth Commissions. I don't think we've come across them, where in a sense the word truth is very, very central to that, which raises the question as to whether every other transaction or action is less than the truth.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting. But it's interesting as the way that, as I think it now, that the Poverty Truth Commission collective, which now exists, have somehow taken themselves off from the mainstream, and the relationships and stories are nearly inside their box now, rather than having transcended the wider societal box, if that makes sense. That bothers me a little as to what has happened to that, because it's set out to listen to stories and to engage with stories in a very, very central way. Do you have any comment on that?
I haven't. I've written that down as a note to myself for something to have a look at, because I would be really interested to find out more about that, definitely. But I think there can be a danger sometimes, can't there, with projects that have got quite a clear objective to begin with, and perhaps take different turns and change. Yeah. But yeah, I'm going to definitely have a little investigate there and do a little bit of research, because that sounds really, really interesting. I'm sorry that I can't
No, it's
speak
just
to that
to share
particularly,
it as
but
part of the
mm,
of the session. I mean, the language they use, it's very central.
yeah.
It's a Poverty Truth Commission,
Mm,
in a sense. And thankfully, they're still actually happening. There's a new one just been launched in an area of the northeast. So the kind of thrust of the thing hasn't been lost completely, because it's
yeah.
still proving to be an interesting pathway for areas to follow. In that sense, it still has something unique to offer. Some groups where the stories they'll now tell each other relate to to the truth about poverty and
Yeah.
these kind of issues. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I
I think
guess.
it's sorry.
No, I was just thinking, because it's about where do the stories go, isn't it? And sort of ownership. And you referred to sort of being asked to come up with one-liners for how well did all this go as a measurement. But quite often we're asked to provide case studies and, all those things and those stories. And what Jim's saying is, I'm just wondering, where do they go and who owns them?
Mhm.
Because I'm assuming that's what you're meaning, Jim, that
Yeah.
that people tell their stories, we hear them, they get put into reports and evaluations and then disappear. And I hadn't really thought about like the ownership of that and where they come back, and are used by others or owned by others. Good point, Jim. Thanks.
Mhm.
So, you mentioned the issue of sorry, you mentioned the issue of truth, and as you know, I come from a storytelling culture where one of our mottos is never let the truth get in the way of a good story. But also from a culture that has contested stories.
Mm.
And I remember doing a radio program. I was asked to do a history of Northern Ireland, and I thought, how can I do it justice? And so I did it. I did a history of Northern Ireland through song. So every sort of major event, I tried to play a song from one tradition and a song from another tradition. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on what's the if you have a community or communities which have quite hard edges, how can we find ways of listening to contested stories? I think for me, music is sort of important with that. There's there's been a thing on the last few months which is very impressive, where they've gathered Rangers and Celtic fans together in a theatre, and not for a fight, but they have musicians from each of the sort of the clubs, and they sort of sit and listen to the songs. Presumably the less abusive songs, but the sort of more lyrical songs, etc. And the sort of the respect, and the listening, and I think the understanding of a different story from yours, I think has been incredible to witness. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts on contested stories.
I think it's perhaps how we listen, isn't it? Like the example you give there, that people are being exposed to that story that they perhaps wouldn't agree with. They wouldn't, but they're giving it the respect to sit and actually listen to it. I think we had a chat one lecture actually about the television program Say Nothing. That is very deliberately from one point of view, and you watch it and you're aware all the time that it is being told from one perspective. But I think it's a beautiful story and it's told beautifully. But do I agree with every point of fact and every point of truth? No, I probably don't. But it's still an important story to be told. And I think there's that space, isn't there? How do we let different people use story to unpack what they've been through, what they've experienced? It isn't always going to be neat and perfect and truthful. But I think story, music, poetry, I think a lot of these things can help people, as well as the conversations that we talked about. There's just something really powerful about a human conversation where someone doesn't butt in and correct like every point that you make, but listens. It doesn't mean we don't challenge, because I think that's really important. If someone's saying something that is, unhelpful and discriminatory, it's not that we can't challenge certain things, but that we do that we create spaces where people can unpack. Perhaps some people haven't ever had that chance and that opportunity. I think it is really important. But yeah, I love the music idea. I think that's great.
It is about how we help people to listen, I think.
Mm.
I think is quite crucial, because we've just finished running a bite-sized course in community development. And one of the problems was that people didn't listen to each other. And so the course became increasingly difficult, because there was one or two very dominant voices and everybody else almost gave up, and trying to manage that and give everybody a chance to talk and to listen. But I think teaching or helping people to develop listening skills is quite crucial, particularly when you're dealing with discrimination and certain, held beliefs or views, that the hard edges that Noel's talking about, that doesn't really want to listen to anybody else or to hear another view. That's their identity. That's what they're hanging on to. Help them to listen to others and not feel threatened by it, I think, is probably one of the skills we really need to be promoting in CD.
Thank you. Yeah.
It feels really relevant in a sort of where communities are so, like, even communities of identity are so geographically separate, and the way we talk to each other and connect to each other is so dominated by online discourse and the things that sit in that space, and how easy it is to not do all the things that you've just been talking about. It's so easy to not do that, to not be able to listen to somebody, to just be completely surrounded by people who think the same as you and do the same thing as you. It's like, space for that it feels really relevant, doesn't it? Well, it's really relevant to me, the kind of skills you're talking about having and doing and being in places with people and helping them have them just feels super relevant right now. certainly in the communities that I exist in. Certainly, yeah. Absolutely.
Mm. It's quite interesting, just in terms of the theme today, that the northeast of England here, there's an interesting story behind what we traditionally called here the Faith and Community Project, which in its beginning challenged the church in some ways, because the agreement with the Church Urban Fund originally was that we would only spend the money in the disadvantaged communities. That was one part of the story, in a sense. The second part of the same story was that if a local community did actually get the money we could offer for a worker half-time for 2 years, then they had to employ somebody who lived in that community. And that proved a very, very interesting story, in a sense, because we had to deal with a complaint from one of the clergy in one project who didn't go on with the appointed worker. So part of that story was that we made an agreement before we considered the problem, is that it wouldn't be assumed that we would ask the local worker to leave. The church people said, oh, we'll have to deal with the problem then, won't we? And it was interesting the way that actually happened. And at the end of the day, the problem was that local people actually shared their stories with the local person. And the clergy person didn't find it that easy to listen and speak with local people. And therefore, local people spoke, with the worker. That makes sense.
Mm.
So the person's status as the clergy person was actually being threatened because they couldn't impose their story into that situation. So it was interesting, and that was a community development project, and actually it took 8 or 9 years for the local bishop to learn that that's how we're distributing the money, and having heard that, didn't like it. It was interesting that they weren't, even as the bishop, alert to the story of what was happening in these localities. But it's a dilemma for faith groups, the danger of imposing their story, biblical or whatever, onto people. And for interest, I have a connection with the Iona community as a member of the Iona community personally, and we have an outdoor site on the island of Mull, which is quite near Iona. And the decision was taken that the traditional worship that was practiced in Iona wouldn't actually be the starting point for this residential centre on Mull, because young people who were coming from Glasgow and poor areas just had no history of that church story. But why should we impose that story on them through forms of worship? So, in a sense, half the community now struggles with the idea that they're running a centre where worship is not central to it. So again, there's half a dozen stories in there of people's reaction and how they relate to it, and but central to those who were developing this centre was the idea that we had to stop everything we did to listen to the stories that the young people were bringing to them, so they have that period of reflection where people are encouraged from local areas to tell their stories. What is interesting is there's never any question that those young people who experience that want to come back again. It's very, very interesting. The way that actually happened is that, just having stopped to listen to their story meant they wanted to come back to tell their story again, which was interesting. Anyway, I'm just connecting it to another community, faith-oriented context where these things were very, very key.
I think that going back to your earlier point about local people and communication, we can often have those shorthands, can't we, of from people within our own community, which makes it easier to communicate. And I think there has got to be more respect for that, really. That's really, really important. Whether that's geographical locality or shared experience, we can have those points of reference, which means that we've got a hook of understanding with the people that we're talking to. Yeah, and I can see that how that's really difficult if that's not respected by external funders or people who are feeling like they should be in charge of the project or they should be in charge of. But yeah, that can be a really powerful thing.
I mean, there's very little evidence in faith communities, church communities, of interest to learn about the Islamic story. At all. I don't know any church, that in a sense wants to listen to the story of their neighbours, living side by side, who, come from a different religious story.
Yeah.
And this assumption that the church people have the story, that's their story, that's the only story, which is a nonsense, really, isn't it, in terms of the world that we have.
Yeah, I think that's not the right way to go about good interfaith dialogue, really, to be I'm coming into this conversation knowing I'm right, and
Exactly.
it's never a good starting place, is it? But yeah, I think if you're going to start a conversation, you've got to be prepared to have an open conversation, have a conversation. It's exactly the same with interfaith as the other examples that we've been talking about this morning, that there's got to be space for all to speak and all to listen. I think that's really, really important. And there are examples of places that are doing that really well. But as I say, I'm in central Manchester, where there is a lot of good, strong interfaith work going on. Often that can come about because of a shared concern for a community issue or an issue like the environment or something like that, where people can see a way to work together, and perhaps those conversations about faith can happen around that focus. But I think you're absolutely right. I think it has to be a space where people listen as well as speak, because otherwise it's not being undertaken with respect, is it?
In terms of our own professional interests, that we have quite a strong community organising force in the North East China. We are citizens, it's called.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things is that together Muslims and the church people engaged on the metro. Together went to the metro because there was racism on the metro. So they actually acted together on a community issue. So that was I'm not a fan of community organising, but in a sense, when a third of the group acting on community problems, is coming from the different faiths, it's a very, very powerful action, to be quite honest.
Definitely.
We're talking about large numbers. We're not talking about one or two. We're talking about maybe a meeting will be 600 people there, and a third will be Muslim. Working together on a community problem, which makes so much more sense, really.
And it adds the element of surprise as well. I think people aren't expecting that. I think people are often expecting there to be, disagreement from faith groups. They're expecting there to be antagonism but yeah, it can add a beautiful element of surprise if people are working together. And that can be a really positive thing.
I really like the idea of community having an element of surprise. Little gem I'll be taken away from that.
Yeah.
Anybody else got anything that they want to talk about that this has brought up for them, or like I said before, you want to ask Joe?
Where are you based, Donna? I don't recognise.
Well, we still can't hear you, Donna. I don't know if it's your speakers. You're not muted, but we can't hear you.
Oh, never mind. I think what it raises, though, for me is this whole thing about power and about who listens and who doesn't. And how you, because it's the thing we've always grappled with as community workers, is how communities get to tell their own stories and to be listened to. And the ways that we've tried, whether it's through like the more formal research or the anecdotes or whatever, to get people to understand communities, understand people and what their hopes and fears are. But
Is that working now?
Yes,
Sure.
yes, we can hear you now. Yes.
Sorry, I'm based up in Aberdeen City. I'm community development for I'm working within a community development team with a local authority. I do have a faith myself, so I was very interested to hear how I just wanted to hear just to do something enriching for myself. The takeaways that have resonated with me this morning have been around capturing stories and listening to stories, but where that story is held, because I agree with what you're saying there, Val, that sometimes we're quick to take someone's story and showcase or to kind of satisfy funding and justifications for things, but or sometimes what happens that story becomes a celebrity, that person becomes a focal point for others to connect with or piggyback on the back of. So I think I am very mindful in the area that I work, which is quite a deprived part of our city, that these stories are really rooted in people's journey to wellness or to moving on for their own learning and development, but to make sure that their voice is heard in a way that they want to be represented. We've got a radio station in Aberdeen called Station House Media, and they're very much community based. They've got a radio station. They do podcasts, and they're very good at capturing stories. And like National Poverty Week or Anti-Poverty Week, they'll share those stories by film and interview. But they've definitely been part of that. Film clips and stuff to make it. But I suppose it was just a good reminder about that keeping people's stories precious to them and obviously learning, but just making sure that it stays with them rather than gets transferred elsewhere to satisfy the needs of funders and all of that. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of thank you for kind of revisiting that. Yeah.
Thank you. Cool. Anything else from anybody? Oh, good.
no, just a huge thank you for what you've done, Joe. It's just fascinating and made me think a lot.
Thanks, Joe.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Right, I'd echo that as well. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for being part of this. It's been lovely to work with you. There is more seminars, more webinars coming from ESB if anyone would like to join them. There isn't one until January, which may feature a special guest from this particular one as well. Noel will be doing that one. So if you are interested in any of the webinars that we've got coming up, they're all on our website. You've kind of already signed up to the emails about them. But yeah, thank you for everybody for coming. And thanks again to Joe.